So thank you very much for taking up your valuable time. I'm Ria from the Centre for Peaceful Solutions, and this talk is about prison reform. The whole idea of prison reform has been in the news, which is really great. I hear that they want to do great things. Somebody has sat up and taken notes. And I just want to talk about my experiences in prisons and how I see it, and some ideas that I have, and talk a little bit about some things that we want to do in the future, upcoming for us. But before I start talking about prisons, I wanted to sort of contextualise this. We've just taken on a patron, and our patron is called Roger Grafe. And Roger is an expert in restorative justice and a filmmaker. He's made over 160 films and filmed in places that people don't normally get access. And I'd like to read. So, 1 in 3 British males is convicted of a non-motoring criminal offence by the time he is 30. Read that again. 1 in every 3 British males will have been convicted, not just arrested, for a non-motoring criminal offence by the age of 30, according to the Home Office cohort study of 3 generations. So I found that staggering. And what it said to me was, isn't it interesting, like, who are the criminals then? Who are they? Because I can see I've got a number of viewers on this webinar, and if I'm looking at 1 in 3, then there's a significant proportion of criminals on this webinar, if the statistics are correct. So, the introduction goes on to say, the crimes which make up the bulk of the figures and do affect strangers are offences against property, burglary and theft. The majority of these crimes are committed by a small number of people, not the armed professional gangs of television drama, but teenagers. Equally, only a small percentage, just 5% of offenders, commit % of detected property crime. Only 8% commit 80%. That means if we were able to find a way of diverting this small group from the habit of persistent offending, the crime rate would fall dramatically. These unruly teenagers keep the police on the defensive about ineffectiveness. They make the courts and prisons to which they return with exhausting regularity feel useless. They push up our insurance rates, especially in cities, keep old ladies, even in peaceful rural areas, imprisoned by fear behind locked doors. They lead pundits and politicians to fulminate about the collapse of law and order, and sometimes of Western civilization itself. In 1990, Roger goes on, I was commissioned by a newspaper to ask judges and magistrates about why they sent people to prison. I interviewed 14 judges and magistrates about their use of prison when 2/3 of ex-prisoners were reconvicted within 2 years of leaving jail. For offenders under 21, that figure rises to 3/4. Although the judges and magistrates I spoke to spanned a wide spectrum of political views, they all agreed that prison was virtually used as a means to stop reoffending. But in despair, they admitted that for persistent offenders, especially those who had already given cautions, probation and community service, they did not know what else to do. So I just wanted to use that to think about, when we talk about prisons, we're really talking about a prison population. We're not really talking about building. And we're talking about people who commit crimes and go to prison. And who are they? Because if we just simply keep calling people criminals, then what are we actually addressing in society? So who are we talking about? One of the things that really interested me about that was the idea that there are many, many teenagers on a carousel. And at one point, I was the chair of a key stage 4 pupil referral unit. And some of those kids in our school, so some of them had criminal convictions and others were really in that last chance cafe. In fact, one of the kids at our school went to prison as Britain's youngest contract killer. Now, what was interesting for me was that once I decided to engage with these teenagers and talk them with respect and equality, and to kind of meet them emotionally where they were, we were able, the head teacher and I were able to totally turn the school around. And one of the problems that I found when I did a sort of survey of the staff, which was our sort of, are we ready to become a restorative school, sort of preparation work, one of the things that I found was that some of our staff were actually frightened of the kids, and that really didn't help them. So interestingly enough, fast forward now, I'm going into prisons, and I find equally that sometimes the staff are frightened of the prisoners. So, well, what does that mean? Okay, so if you take a human being and you simply attach a label, you know, robber, burglar, murderer, criminal, and you fail to see a human being of which that offending behaviour was one manifestation of something going on inside them, then what I found is you continuously fail human connection that will help that person to change. So what do I mean by that? When a person does things that creates injury, loss or harm to another human being or to society, then clearly what we want is for that person to change. For that person to change, they are going to have to learn something. To learn something, I need to be emotionally present. What I found was that actually, if you want me to take on new information, I actually need to feel relaxed. If I don't feel relaxed, then chances are I can't really hear what's going on. So if I want you to, and in society, is it that we want to make changes? We want people that cause injury, loss or harm to change. Now, one of the things that's really important is that if we understand change processes, then one of the things that we learn really quickly is that relapse is a really important part of change. So how can I how can I get that across? Okay, so think about a time that you wanted to lose weight, stop smoking, give up drinking, eat better food, go out less, spend less money, you know, anything like that. Think about a time that you wanted to do that. Then think about from when you had the thought to actually executing it, did you do that in one go? Did you wake up and go, I'm going to do X, and then it just happened? No, there was a process. Some of that process was internal, and some of that process was external. And in there was relapse. Now, relapse is a natural part of a change process. It's really important for people to go back and revisit things from a new position to find it doesn't work anymore. The problem that we're really facing here is that we are not willing to accept, quite rightly, relapse in the form of injury, loss or harm to self, other or system. So what we really need to do is get somebody into a state of relaxation where they can take on some new information. We need them to understand that relapse in the form of a crime, relapse in the form of, you know, going out stealing cars or beating up old ladies or whatever it is, relapse in that form will not be tolerated by society. So we're going to have to go on a journey and work this one out. Now, for me, if I just lock someone up, down for many hours a day and leave them in circumstances which bear no relevance to life on the outside, I can't see how I'm going to be able to support somebody to go through that change process, and I can't see how I'm going to see a demonstration of what it might be like when I release you back into society. So that's kind of the first place for me that really, really screams at me. Into these buildings called prison, right? And what I want to say is I'm not actually against prison, okay? Because I actually believe that a natural part of how humans express their upset and disapproval is through ostracization. And I think you can see that in different tribes and in ancient, even in sort of non-violent communities. Ostracization is a natural way of people saying, well, actually, we don't want you to be part of what's going on because you're not safe. So the idea that we pick somebody up and we put them somewhere until they're ready to come back, for me, works. What I'm interested in is when we pick someone up and we put them over there, what are we doing with them? So a couple of times when I've been into prisons, and I'll explain the work that we've done in a minute, but the guys have said, oh, would you like to come on the wing? You know, come and have a look, come and see what's going on. And I must admit, walking into someone's cell and seeing two guys sleeping on sort of bunk beds with, you know, this much room between the wall and the bed and a toilet pan at the end of the cell, which means that, you know, they have to kind of figure out how to get past this narrow gap to get to the loo or to get out or whatever. And to put people in that situation didn't seem to me to hold any kind of, it didn't seem to me to have any sense, because I wouldn't be able to tell, leave someone there for 10 years or 20 years. I'm not going to be able to tell what it is you're going to do when you come back out into society. So I felt a sort of despair around that, and I thought, well, what is it we're doing? So, okay, so we use a retributive justice system, which means that, you know, a retributive justice system means that if you do something wrong or bad, we look to what law or rule has been broken and then we punish you. Of punishing you is so that we will teach you a lesson through suffering. So if you think about it, I just can't see how that's going to work. And then when I think about it, so this is a bit, I'm sort of streaming here because there are just lots and lots of things I really want to say to you about this. I really want to sort of talk. So, all people in this building, all of the same sex, which again now completely distorts anything that represents life on the outside. You create situations in which people are forced to find ways to live together without any real sort of dialogue or understanding of what's going on, in an enforcement system where nothing is really explained. I mean, you can kind of come into prison and just go through this system without really understanding what's going on. And then what's going to happen is people are going to form clubs, people are going to form associations, people are going to want to take drugs, apply drugs, people are going to want to do business. You know, people are going to want to sort of do something. So what I found, I mean, when I went into Wandsworth prison, I was absolutely amazed at the ingenuity of how we're getting drugs into the prison. And what I learned was that they had people on the outside throwing tennis balls over. And when they got the signal that the tennis ball had landed in the right place, then they could send the tennis ball over with the drugs in. So I thought about this and I thought, wow, there's so much brain power, so much ingenuity, so much creativity going on in a prison, and all put to the worst possible use. So I came with this radical idea. Well, in fact, David and I came up with this radical idea when we were just sort of chatting about it. And we said, what if you put all that ingenuity to good use? All that, I mean, there's some really amazing technical know-how, creativity, making things. What if you took all of that? Neutral prison, because the prison would need to support some kind of business so that people were being given skills, they were producing something, and they were genuinely paying back a debt to society so that what they were doing became cost neutral, and then leaving with self-esteem, with skills, with a way of earning an income, with more than they came, you're leaving with more than they came in with. And I don't know, maybe that's pie in the sky. I don't see it. I'm an entrepreneur. I have made something out of nothing several times in my life. I started an advertising agency with a desk and a telephone. I started a charity shop with begging for some start-up money. I started a charity from my front room at home. It's really possible to make something out of nothing if the will is there and if the skills are there and if the people are motivated in the right way to do that. So I love this idea of a cost-neutral prison, and that instead of hurting people, teach them a lesson, which, you know, we've clearly found hasn't worked. I mean, it just hasn't worked because the reoffending rates tell you that you could actually say, well, actually, yes, you are going to pay a debt to society because you have created a loss or harm. It's tangible. There are people who've been affected by it. And what we're going to do is we are going to remove you from society. You are going to have certain freedoms taken away from you while we readjust something and work with you in order to create something that pays back to society, that's a living demonstration that everyone can see. Now, if we began in prison like that, and we started by saying we need to create something that's really productive, really effective, really efficient, and that has community in it, the people who've got, you know, more skills, more on the money, are going to have to look after some of the people who are less able. If it means that then we need to keep something really good and beautiful happening, which we need to get into a dialogue, which means we need to work out how to deal with conflict, which means we need to work out how to get along with each other to be the most productive and beautiful version of ourselves that there is, and I'm given the testing ground in which to try that, then is I've got a far better chance of watching somebody and saying, actually, this person gets it. This person gets it and has demonstrated something that means I'm going to give this guy a chance, I'm going to give this woman a chance, I'm going to give this person a chance to go back in and take that and apply it here when their freedom isn't taken away. So the good news of what I'm describing is that the structures are already there. So what I'm not saying is, I'm not idealistically saying knock all the jails down and get rid of all the people that work in them and, you know, and start all over again and redesign it all. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there are some perfectly adequate prisons. There are some perfectly good people that work in prisons. There are some people who've done stuff, need to find a readjustment. And what this requires is a change of intention. So all the infrastructure is actually already there. So what I'm proposing isn't going to cost a lot of money. But probably, my guess is, knowing what I know about life, probably going to save us a fortune. And actually, you know, I can understand why people get so upset, because, you know, we've tried to raise money to do work in prisons. Really hard. Funders, there are only a few who are interested in actually working directly with prisoners. You know, the public, I mean, forget it. I mean, forget saying they want to work with, because, you know, the whole idea that you want to spend money on criminals is really unpopular. I mean, it is really unpopular. So we found that really difficult. And when you think about it, of course, because keeping someone in prison is around 40,000 a year. So we're already spending a fortune. And actually, I don't want to spend that kind of money. I think it's a hell of a money. And if there's some way to make that cost neutral, then I would really want to explore that. I would really, really want to explore that. So I look at that, I go into prison and I see guys walking around and all the rest of it, and I understand that has been said to me many times is, but you see, you know, you have to have this, people have to be punished because it's a deterrent. You know, I hear that a lot. And it's taken me a little while to kind of articulate a response to that. Because I've always known in my heart I couldn't quite match that. So I'd like to try that out with you. although I can't see you, so I don't know. But you can always post a question and say, "Oh, this is complete rubbish, shut up." So when I thought about Terence, and David and I were sort of teasing this out the other day, where I got to was, okay, so the vast majority of people are not going to commit a crime, not going to cause injury, loss or harm to other people because they don't want to. They're not, it's not out of any threat, it's because the vast majority of people just want to get on with their life, get on with other people, have as reasonable a life as they can. Okay? And so that's the vast majority. And then at this end, you've got a minority of people who do stuff that hurts and has an impact on others. And in between, you've got a narrow band or a margin of people who are not doing this stuff because they assess the risk and they don't want to go to jail. They don't want the punishment. So yeah, so I would say there probably is a margin of people who, you know, would kill their elderly grandparent for the inheritance if they thought they could get away with it. But the issue for me is it isn't about taking someone and humiliating them and shaming them and turning them into broken people. It's more about, okay, so here's the choice. The choice is you can be free, you can live your life, you can take responsibility, you can do stuff, or you can take your chances, and what we're going to do is take your freedom away, and we're going to take your freedom away, and what we're going to do is we are going to put you in a place where you are paying a debt to society. So you're going to come into this cost neutral prison and you're going to do some work and you're going to pay for it. Because we need this not to cost us anything. So how do you get there? And for me, you know, when I've been going into prison, so I'll explain a little bit about what I've done so far. So I've been into 5 prisons, and in those prisons, what I've done is I've generally worked with people who've committed violent crimes, or high status people on the wings, and we bring them together and we train them in the dialogue roadmap, and then we show them how you can use the dialogue roadmap to mediate disputes between people, and then we get them working, and then we get them mediating disputes. Now, what's been really interesting for me is I've been in 5 prisons, usually have a cohort of between 12 and 16, but we've had as many as 20. Usually have a cohort of between 12 and 16. And so far yet, not one person, and you know, we've had some people on the training who really have had literacy, really bad literacy issues. We've had people who've brought us their medication to show us, you know, some of the mental health issues they have. Had some really highly manipulative people, you know, we've had people all sorts of states, and not one person didn't get it. Not one of those people didn't get it. And I say because 2 things that I've heard. One is probably the most shocking thing I've ever heard, which was, we never knew that you could sort out an argument through talking. Now, think about that. Someone says, we never knew that you could sort out an argument through talking. I must question the education system. I have to. That's where I go to. And the second thing, which really, really tickled me, was, of course, when we're, you know, preparing to mediate a dispute, when we're working with the parties, we're laying the ground and setting things up so that whatever happens, you know, we create the trust and safety for that conversation to take place. One of the guys said, I never thought I would be having a conversation about having a conversation. And that really tickled me. Now, interestingly enough, one of the things that came up, guys, about why they really like the mediation training, and why once one cohort of being, you've got, you know, lots of them want to come after you. We always manage to run out of funding. Was that when we're going in and saying, actually, I'd like you to be a mediator, I'd like you to learn some skills, I'd like you to put all the things that you know to good use, and I'd like you to see how this works. What the feedback that we consistently get is we're the first people that have come in that aren't trying to fix them. So usually some of the complaints are that if you're invested in victim awareness or thinking skills or some of the other courses that go in, and you know, I know there is some marvellous stuff that goes on in prison, and I know that people have life-changing, you know, events. But one of the complaints that we've had is the starting point is there's something wrong with me and I have to be fixed. And I think I can kind of get with a level of upset and resentment might come with a real or perceived hearing of that message. So when we go in and say, hey, we got something really important for you to do, and we know you can do it, the results have been amazing. I mean, the results have been truly amazing. From changing, you know, a lifer, hardened gang member, you know, saying, actually, this stuff has opened me up, and I want to go into therapy because I can see some disturbance in me that I've never seen before. You know, from people taking a sort of personal responsibility through to violent disputes on the wing being intervened in by another prisoner and a murder being committed on the wings. So, okay, so you might say, well, so what? You've been in 5 prisons and, you know, whatever. But for me, I saw true engagement. I saw people who really wanted to be able to do something different. I saw people see another way of looking at the world in which they could imagine themselves navigating differently. And even had one guy who said, Maria, if I'd known this 6 months ago, I wouldn't have murdered my wife. And he was literally at the beginning of an 18-year sentence, which he said he wasn't going to appeal because he deserved to be there. So where am I? Where have I got to? I feel like I've just kind of streamed a whole lot of stuff. So what do I think of prisons? So we've also trained some prison officers, and actually, you know what? Most prison officers are really good people. Good people who want to do a job. The missing piece for me in what I've seen is that I'm not sure training that prison officers get is adequate for the things that they need to navigate, negotiate and come up against. So one of the biggest problems that I see is if I'm put somewhere, if I'm put in a prison, here's a really good example. When I was going into one prison, I had to go to be a key holder, I had to go to some security talk. And in the security talk, there were people there was like someone who was a temp from an accountancy agency, and there was, you know, someone who would go and do some part-time work in the kitchen, and you know, there were some people who really had never been in a prison before, sitting in this talk because they were going to need access to get in and out. And the way that talk took place put the fear of God, the people around that table. So what happened was the people sitting around the table were saying things like, so will they come up to me? Will they, what would I do if? And I did end up, you know me, I've got a big mouth and I've always got to put my foot, you know, and I did end up sort of stopping me and saying, you know, I don't know if it's useful, but I've been going into prisons for quite some time. Would it be useful for you to hear some of my experiences? And I was just able to say, you're meeting a bunch of human beings. And what you're meeting is a bunch of human beings who often feel embarrassed and ashamed. And you know, you're only going to be walking around when prisoners are around if it's during something called free flow. And it's, you know, it's really unlikely that you're going to have any kind of encounter. And for me, that summed it up, this kind of like, wind everybody up, let's get people frightened, let's talk about these people, let's talk about them. And then that creates an energy. What I found was that there were certain prison officers who really got that and could just get to the humanity of what was going on. And the prison officers that could get to the humanity of what's going on didn't need to carry their baton, didn't need to carry any sort of weapon, perfectly safe walking around, because what they understood was that they had a power of dialogue, a way of being and a way of speaking that could meet the other human being. So where for me it falls down is there are, in the prison officer training, you're giving people enforcement, but not giving them any negotiation skills. So why is that a problem? So if I have an encounter with somebody and I'm wearing a uniform, okay? So if I'm wearing a uniform, automatically there is a power imbalance in the conversation. Who's pumping themselves up or whatever, the power imbalance, because one person in that conversation has the power of enforcement. So I'm dealing with somebody who never knew that you could sort out an argument by talking. I'm dealing with someone who we haven't even got to trauma yet. I mean, you know, let's get to trauma. So I'm dealing with someone who's probably on some level embarrassed or ashamed or resentful or upset or angry, or has a multitude of other stuff going on today. And I talk in a gruff or brusque voice, and I just give that person an order. And guess what? Even in our daily lives, if somebody talks to you in a brusque way in the workplace, or your wife or husband gives you an order, and they say, no, I wasn't giving you an order, but you perceived it like that. So now I'm feeling rubbed up the wrong way, and I'm going to come back with a retort, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to even out the power imbalance so I don't feel even smaller, right? So I come back with a retort, and then what happens is that retort triggers the prison officer, because the prison officer thought that wearing a uniform and carrying some kind of weapon was going to provide an automatic protection. And of course it doesn't, because it's the meeting of two human beings. So now what happens is the human being that triggered has the power of enforcement, defaults straight to enforcement. And what I found was actually, if you develop good, compassionate, rigorous negotiation skills, where you can actually hold the line, hold the boundary of what's going on, don't be diverted, distracted, you know, don't allow the smoke and mirrors, don't allow the, hold the line of the point of the conversation, but manage that with finesse, with respect, with a sense of, this is another human being in front of me. And what I found is you can de-escalate almost everything instantly. So there's something there for me. And what we did was we developed a training called Every Conversation Matters. Because if you go into a prison, oh God, excuse me. You go into a prison and you've got rioting, and you've got prisoners climbing up on the roofs and, doing what prisoners do when they riot, then it didn't go from being a peaceful place to that in one jump. Ultimate feedback that something in what is going on is not working for that population or community. And while you might say, well, sod it, they're criminals, why should we care about that? They're there to be punished. It isn't a holiday. The point is that there's more of them than there is of prison officers. And actually, in one prison that I was in, where they used to have 8 prison officers on the wing, that was down to 2 with an increased amount of paperwork. So now you've got 2 prison officers, one trying to keep up with the paperwork, tearing their hair out, saying, well, who do I help? Do I go to the 2 guys having a ruck over there, or do I go to the guy who's self-harming and might commit suicide? So, okay, resources are tight, resources are difficult. I'm not saying, this is where we are, this is the raw material we find ourselves in. So let's find a different conversation. Let's start to see what we can diffuse, what can be resolved, where the dialogue can happen, and what parts can the prisoners take responsibility for themselves? What bits can they do themselves here? Because they're actually quite capable of doing it. We've proved that in 5 prisons. So I'm really interested in how we can literally change the intention, change the conversation, and how that will change outcomes. So, so I'm noticing that I didn't get any questions, and now I have a screen that says there are tech problems and the website isn't loading the questions, and now somebody else, so isn't this technology amazing? So someone else behind someone else is now figure that out and send the questions over. Because I did think to myself, has everyone gone to sleep? Where is everyone? I was hoping to provoke at least a couple of questions. 9:15, we have a few minutes left. Did I cover? Oh no, we never even got to trauma, did we? So one of the things that has really come up for me recently, and I've been really thinking about and looking at how the dialogue supports it, is working with trauma. And for me, what I've noticed is that when stuff happens, when people start to manifest undesirable behaviour that causes injury, loss or harm to self, other or system, when that happens, I think there's a much more important question than why did you do that? I think the more important question is, what happened to you? What happened to you? Because one of the things that we learned when we did our gang project, we did 3 years doing violent crime gang work. One of the things that we learned was that the people that perpetrate this stuff, the people that get involved with this stuff, the people that are out there making those choices, from loving, compassionate, happy families. So something has happened. And recently I come across something called the ACEs score, Adverse Childhood Effects score, which is something you can look up. And it was a study with hundreds of thousands of people. And what they did was, there's a list of 10 questions, and I think it got added to later on, so I think there are now 17 questions. And they are literally yes/no answers. So it takes a minute to do them. But they're all questions that are things like, before the age of 18, did you ever witness a parent drunk? Before the age of 18, were you ever sexually abused? Before the age of 18, did you ever see your mother being hit? You know, it's a series of yes or no questions. And what the study found was that if people had 4 or more yeses, options in life and where they would end up would be drastically worse than people who had 1 to 3, and of course people who had 0. And this was really interesting. I did a talk in New York, and the talk was to the legal aid agency, and the people in the audience, there were 50 people, some of whom were social workers and some of whom were defence lawyers, and they were the people representing the really poor people, so those people with complex needs. My co-speaker actually said, look, why don't we do a little experiment? Why don't we just take an ACEs score of what's in the room? So these weren't the actual people that were being helped, these were the helpers. What we found was that in that room, 39% of us had 4 or more yeses. And these were the helpers. So for me, it's a religious thing. Let's take an ACEs score in every prison. Let's start there. Let's begin with an ACEs score and see what that tells us. Not just with the prisoners, but with everyone. There are some really important baselines we need to understand about what we're working with. Because you see, if I go in as a helper and what I'm trying to do is work out my trauma by helping someone else, who's getting helped? So I really kind of started to think about that. And what I really saw was how the dialogue roadmap really supports people when they're manifesting their trauma and when they're thinking about, you know, in that aftermath, or when they're wanting to reflect about it or wanting to rant about it, you know, when they're in that state and they understand that something, you know, something's gone wrong. I saw how the dialogue roadmap begins to support people through that process. And I began to understand why the mediation training was working so well, because it was doing the job, but without saying, I'm come here to fix your trauma. It was just doing it automatically. So here we have people with trauma, people who are in shame, a group of people in one building. Where else can you find a group of people for whom the strategies they have used have so obviously not worked, all in one place? And for me, that is an amazing opportunity. That is an amazing starting point. That provides a place where we could see some real change, real shift. We could really demonstrate unity. We could provide an absolute demonstration of what it takes to get to sustainability, to be cost neutral, to be in harmony, and to understand, and to not have this kind of cat and mouse thing. Oh yeah, because of course the other thing, you only get put in prison for that which you're caught for. So, you know, there's a whole nother thing. Just because somebody's been been to trial and been found guilty, been convicted of something, that doesn't mean it's the first time they've ever done it. So the other thing that happened to me was when I was sitting with some of the guys and we were talking about these ideas. Because actually, one of the things that's a real problem is there's nowhere in society that you can just go and say, I messed up, help me. Help, because if you've committed a crime, then it's going to invoke a whole system. And what happens is anything to do with you healing is completely lost because you don't count anymore. You don't count anymore. So I think what I'd like to do, so unfortunately the questions just didn't appear, and the tech problems are still with us, and this is the joy of technology. I'm actually planning today, Nathan and I were talking about something that we're going to plan to do, an event park called the Peaceful Pause in the Park. And we're going to invite people to come to the park for 15 minutes with no mobile phones, with no technology, and just be together in silence for 15 minutes and remember what the stillness is like. Sorry, that's a bit of an aside. I really wanted to talk to you about what we're planning to do. So, Dartmoor Prison, a prison that has the most amazing senior management team. For me, having met them, they are a dream team. I've done quite a lot of work with the managing chaplain in some of the other prisons that I've been in. So we have a real kind of rapport and a real history together of results. And he's taken the dialogue roadmap on in such an amazing way. And there is described as an awesome prison governor who I absolutely just fell in love, and a deputy. And she's taken this very bold step and created what's called an integrated regime. So what this means is that there isn't a wing for the sex offenders. Oh my God, everyone says, how awful, how can you do that? Well, she's making it work. But what she's recognised is that in order to complete that journey into something sustainable, to introduce restorative practices across the whole prison, taking a whole prison approach, actually to become a restorative prison. And we have this amazing opportunity to demonstrate that. Now, I've got ideas, So one of the ideas is that we train some guys as mediators. They are set up properly to do mediation work in the prison using the dialogue roadmap. And then they come out of prison trained and experienced. And anyone who's done mediation training knows how difficult it is to get experience into a purpose-built mediation service that's run by ex-offenders. Offenders are mentored to be able to go out into the community, engage with the very young people that we talked about at the start of this webinar, because those are the people that are going to have an impact. Those are the people that are going to be able to talk to the kids in a way that's going to reach them. This is the connection. These are the two wires that need to be connected together. We've already done this in a small pilot in London, which is a family mediation service for prisoners. So one of the things that I noticed that really adds to frustration and upset and gets acted out all over the place is when someone in prison is in turmoil or even just a low level conflict, with a loved one on the outside. Or, you know, someone doesn't turn up with the children, or the visit doesn't happen, or they have an argument, or the phone gets slammed down in one of the phone calls, because of course, you know, I'm not saying the family aren't having a hard time, because, you know, that's the hidden sentence, isn't it? The family serving a prison sentence for something they didn't do. Is that when we work with the prisoner and with the family, we can actually, again, we can get that dialogue going. And if things have gone wrong, or they're likely to go wrong, we can manage and set expectations so that when the prisoner is released, they understand and they've had time to get used to what is likely to happen. Because as far as I understand it, one of the first 48 hours are crucial in reoffending rates. And I know from someone who works in Wormwood Scrubs, you know, he said that, you know, I have guys that we, you know, get ready to leave and they literally say, yeah, boss, I'll see you tonight. Because they know they're going to go out and they're going to do something and they're just going to come back in because they've got nowhere to go. You know, job, no prospects. So we're coming to the end of our time together. I'm really sorry that I wasn't able to see the questions, but to email them to me anyway, or call me, give me a ring, or send me an email, or, you know, I hope something here was of interest. I hope that you will want to follow what we're about to do with interest. And to do that, I would love you to go onto the Centre for Peaceful Solutions website and to sign up so that you keep up to date with what's going on. Just write to me, phone me up, have a conversation, whatever works for you. I hope this has been useful, and I hope you want to, you know, engage with me and us and what we're doing. So thank you very much.